Good evening. It's May 17th, 2013. You're tuning in to the usual Friday evening webcast at LaRouche TV. My name is Jason Ross. Tonight, Mr. LaRouche would like to begin with a question posed by one of the two questioners this evening, Leandra Bernstein. I'd like to call her up.
All right, thank you, Jason, and welcome. Good evening. Now, this question came in on the occasion of what hopefully most people watching this program know is yesterday's introduction of Senate Bill 985, introduced by Tom Harkin of Iowa, which is the Senate bill to restore Glass-Steagall. And this is a momentous development, and one of our organizers who's been doing a lot of the state legislature organizing made the point that we need to take the 30-day perspective. In 1933, May 16th, 1933, Glass-Steagall was originally introduced into the Congress. By June 16th, it was on the president's desk. And so we have a 30-day perspective ahead of us. But to get to the question, this comes from an institutional grouping who say, congratulations on the introduction of a Senate Glass-Steagall bill by Senator Tom Harkin yesterday. This, of course, is an important milestone. However, the fact remains that the Obama White House and Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid are both staunchly opposed to any reinstatement of Glass-Steagall separation. Their Wall Street ties and the reasons for their opposition are obvious to all. Our question is this: how do you assess the battle for full passage of Glass-Steagall now that there are similar bills in both houses of Congress? What is the strategic landscape, both in the United States and abroad, regarding Glass-Steagall, and the kinds of actions you anticipate from those who are desperate to stop it?
Well, what this means is that Obama is already on his way out. That's how this has been set. It was inevitable in a sense, and if you read the signs, you realize repeatedly that Obama is a liability and that they're going to get rid of him. That's the intention. This has been the intention for a long time. After all, Obama is not real in the sense that he's really not the President of the United States. He may be nominally entitled the President of the United States, but he actually is a stooge for the Queen of England and her interests as such. You find out, watch him, and there is nothing in him which is particularly original. He's just a nasty person, extremely nasty person, and a killer. But he is nothing but a product of the British monarchy, the British Empire. Now, the time has come to get rid of the threat which not Obama represents, but which the Queen of England represents. Remember, the point is this, that all kinds of people have all shadings and kinds of attitudes about what is happening. They differ violently. But what is understood now is the hatred against the Queen of England because of her policy, which is to promptly reduce the human population from 7 billion people to 1 billion people, or approximately that. And also to turn the clock backwards biologically, which is what they're already doing. The green policy is a murder policy, because the human species in particular, but all general species, let's take it, there are two kinds of species to consider. One are the human species, the others are the animal or non-human species. They're different. The animals may innovate, as you may find a dog learns to innovate and play tricks and things of that sort. But the essential thing about is that there is creativity in the human being. That is, the human being is the species whose existence depends upon a process of total intellectual revolution. And if the species does not go into total growth in that way, as a revolutionary growth, that is the same thing as physical principles. Animals don't discover physical principles. Good human beings are developed to discover new species. In other words, if we are progressive in our education and our practice, we actually are evolving intellectually as if we were animals evolving biologically. In other words, what we do something in our evolution of our species which only the human species can do. And that's the big issue here. Now, if you go with the Queen's policy, and I'm not exaggerating one iota, the Queen's policy is to turn the biological clock backwards from a pre-human condition. That's what the Green Movement means. What the big problem has been ever since the killing of Kennedy, President Kennedy, we've gone into a dive where we used to be a progressive nation. We did make discoveries. We did improve technologies. But if you look at the picture now, the overall effect has drifted over to the totally negative side. We are now destructive forces. The only thing we have that's any good is weapons, and they're no good. So that's where we stand. So we've now come to the point where you have a complication of how do you organize dumping this president? Which means how do you dump the Queen of England? At least the Queen of England from our area of the world, and any of the areas of our friends we would like to have them benefit too, similarly. But that's what the issue is that. So that we've been put on a program of the Queen has insisted publicly, her spokesman have insisted publicly, is to turn the biological clock back to an inferior species. Turn the biological clock back. Reduce the human population from 7 billion people estimated to about 1 billion estimated. Make them stupid relative to what their ancestors were. That sort of thing. So that there is an anxiety about this, where people in general, you have two problems with it, people in general. First of all, they are human, generally. But secondly, they tend to be cowards. So therefore, they want a change for their benefit, but they want it done for them. Therefore, you got a situation. What we need to get rid of is not all these little guys and so forth in various roles in the United States. That's not the real issue. The real issue is get the Queen of England off our back and what she represents. What she represents for the evil against the whole human species. But we have people who are mostly cowardly. You know them and as your acquaintances. They're generally cowardly. They won't come out straightforward and say what they need. They will try to nudge somebody into doing it for them. And that's what's happening. We've come to the point that this is understood. We're losing everything. All the financial system is about to go. We're in a state of hyperinflation for which there is no comparison in history. We're about doomed unless we dump this operation. Now, dumping the operation means, in the case of the United States, dump Obama. Obama is nothing but a property of the Queen of England, in effect. And if they want to get him out of the government, then things go more easily. So putting Glass-Steagall into motion, as a revived Glass-Steagall, at the same time as dumping Obama, is the convenient way for people as they are today, including people in the United States especially, is to find a pretext that where nobody gets too much pointed out, they're not blamed for all this. Somehow it's going to happen mysteriously, but it's going to happen. And the movement now is to put in Glass-Steagall that is the positive aspect. Nothing but Glass-Steagall could save the United States now. If you don't want Glass-Steagall, you want everybody in the United States dead, or virtually that. But at the same time, you've got to get rid of the trash. And the trash is symbolized and epitomized even by the president. So you've got to find a convenient way of doing a little bit of both to have the net effect that is desired. I understand this, and there are other things involved which I could go into at great length, but I don't think this is the moment for great length.
Thanks, Lynn. Next, we'll have a question from Michael Kirsch.
Good evening. Lynn, I would like to ask you a question that came in from Jacques Cheminade, twice candidate for president of France, 1995 and 2012, and currently subject to financial harassment by the Interior Ministry and the seizure of over $200,000 of campaign funds. He asks, Mr. LaRouche, and this question came in on May 15th. Mr. LaRouche, I know that you have been impressed and worried when you were recently in Europe by the prevailing pessimism in the population, and even in our own European organizations. The French appear to be, in all polls, the most pessimistic of all Europeans, together with the Greeks and the Spaniards. That's why I am the one asking this question. As an American doctor, what would be your suggestion to prop up the Europeans? Of course, both our Glass-Steagall mobilization in the United States and the trend towards an impeachment or departure of Obama, which is now mentioned in the French press, are both excellent news to revive the spirits here. But what else do you have in your first aid kit to inspire a surge of creative imagination? Jacques Cheminade.
Well, first of all, the problem is, as Jacques knows, is that since de Gaulle was dropped out of office in France, there has not been much in Europe that's worth talking about. You know, when you look at the history of the United States, we find in our nation, we find a kind of sovereignty which is natural to our Constitution, as European constitutions really generally are sloppy on this respect relative to our U.S. Constitution. And when we fail, when we become sloppy, we become very disgusting to ourselves in the United States. But we have a legacy going back to the formation, even to the earlier period in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. We have had in the United States a legacy of achievement for which no nation on this planet can match, on record. It's not that we want to cheat them of the right to have that kind of authority. It's they just don't like it, because they were conditioned by the Roman Empire all the way through the British Empire. And the British Empire is literally an empire, which is traced directly from the Roman Empire. It's a very evil phenomenon. There are all kinds of things that go on there, different varieties, different reactions, and so forth. But essentially, the British Empire is something you want no part of, at least not being inside it. And that's the crucial thing. Our problem is we do not yet, and this is even in the case of Glass-Steagall, very few people who study Glass-Steagall and think they know it, think they understand the rules, understand the mechanisms, really don't. Because there are considerations involved which they haven't taken into account. But that's what the essential issue is. We in the United States, and just think about it, we in the United States, if we do what we are capable of doing by virtue of the character of our Constitution and its origins, which go back to Nicholas of Cusa, that tradition is unique. We have that as our property. as our specifically inherited property. We often repudiate it, but we find the elements of it, as in our Constitution, are still there. Europe, the European nations, are slop compared to our nation. We make terrible mistakes. We are shameful in what we don't do, is what we do. But we have the legacy, and this organization does have an increasingly accurate insight into what that legacy is, what creativity is. But the difference is we represent that. Therefore, the world as a whole, take China and its problems, take Japan and its problems, take India and its problems, take Asia Minor and its problems, take Europe and its problems, both Western and Central Europe as its problems. There's nothing in these areas which can match the natural ability of this nation, our United States, when it functions on the basis of its founding principles from the Massachusetts Bay Colony and so forth upward. There's no nation on this planet which has our capability. But it is not something for us to, like misers, hold in our own little pot. Our mission is to give that which we have, which is good, to the world as a whole.
All right. Well, I'd like to return to the issue of Barack Obama, president or monarch, would-be monarch, perhaps, because this week has been a very bad week for Obama. And there was a satirical article entitled "The Obama Administration's Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Week." And if you look at it, began with calls for impeachment late last week, where Senator Inhofe said people may be starting to use the I word before too long in a public statement. He was asked the I word impeachment. He said, "Yup." Also, Representative Chaffetz, Republican from Utah, said he was not taking impeachment off the table. Former Arkansas governor and presidential hopeful Mike Huckabee said, "Before it's over, I don't think this president will finish out his term in office." And additionally, we had calls from Cornel West made very strong statements against Barack Obama this week. Charlie Rangel as well, Carl Bernstein of Watergate fame, and even within his own party, there's the sense that what Obama did with his trifecta, what he did and failed to do on September 11th, 2012, and the crucial 72 hours following that, the IRS targeting of Tea Party groups looking for tax-exempt status, the AP wiretapping, all of these things, you're getting statements even from the leadership of the Democratic Party in a press conference on May 16th. Nancy Pelosi herself said, these are things that cannot be defended. She said, it's not like we're all siding with the administration. But I'd like to ask you more about the background to what's coming out now in the form of these scandals, because in December, it was December of last year, EIR held a press conference with Walter Jones, Charlie Rangel, a senior Democrat from New York, as well as retired Colonel Patrick Lang and Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer. And in that press conference, they presented, among other things, an open letter to Barack Obama stating, if you intend to invade Syria, intend to launch a military campaign, you must come to Congress first. That open letter was signed by a handful of both Democrats and Republicans. And additionally, there were also issues of the constitutionality of the drone program, which were brought up in the House Judiciary Committee by John Conyers. And then now we have an interesting development which you remarked on last week, which are the peace talks that Kerry and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov of Russia are conducted recently. And there are currently plans at the end of the month to have peace talks involving all parties, including the sitting Syrian government. So these are all things that are happening in the background of the scandals that are capturing all of the headlines. And obviously, I haven't gone through all of the background, but I'd like for you to give some insight into what is behind this outpouring against Barack Obama now.
Well, I have had some influence in this process because it was a complicated process, but I was the one who actually set into motion what became known as the great effort, of SDI. It was a process which I was engaged in from my forecasting work as in 1948, where my 48 forecast was actually, or 58 rather, was actually quite to the point. And from that point, the breakdown process has proceeded. And the problems have proceeded. So in and out of this process of my experience over these years, what I really accomplished, I set off the SDI. I did it. How did it happen? I ran for president on my own initiative. It was a fairly short campaign and had one purpose, is prevent thermonuclear war. That was rejected, of course, but then at the later part of the 1970s, a group of people had been formerly associated with the Intelligence Service of the United States during the World War II period. And they came around to me and talked about things, and we began to put something together. There were Germans, important German figures, senior figures, sometimes retired and so forth. The circles of Charles de Gaulle also. So this, and then of course the Soviet Union at a later point. So all these things come together, that there is in society, as in my case and my associates in these various past escapades or so forth that I've involved in, that people come together and they have a sense of what needs to be done. They are critical and self-critical about what should be attempted, and that's the way history goes in one sense, the good side of history. Sometimes there are people who have a very clear view. I did that at a certain point because I'm a forecaster. I'm an expert at forecasting, and as very few people are. Therefore, I have a very more specific kind of approach. But this is what happens. We in the United States, and there are people who are now dead, who were my friends during these periods, and we had these kinds of ideas. So what you have is a society which in general is highly imperfect in its organization. But you have some of us actually are able to exert a kind of influence, like whispering into the balcony from outside. You're off the balcony and you whisper into the room inside. And sometimes you get things through. My approach has been, for as long as I've been forecasting, which is essentially 1954 when I started doing that, is deliberate. It's always been a deliberate approach. I forecast what must be happen, what must be considered, what must be done. Other people will take a more cautious view, but they will come in with elements that they contribute to that common interest. And we, by our talking with each other in various strange ways sometimes, we manage to put together a set of ideas which is what we would like to happen. And sometimes that works, sometimes we're defeated. But there is in society, especially in trans-European society, transatlantic society, there is a very specific kind of this kind of similitude, and that's where I lie in my work, and other people do. There is a short, narrow number of people in society who play that kind of function, but that function is essential, and we try to make things happen. Not by forcing people, not by thrusting, not by but by insinuating ideas which we know are needed, and trying to correlate what we know of the needed ideas with the difficulties and opportunities for handling these things. And I'm getting a little bit older now, as you may notice, but it's still my practice. And there are people in society who naturally will sometimes shun me because I'm hot for them. They don't like my troubles. But they agree with me in this certain kind of way, not as a specific policy, sometimes so, but rarely. Usually it's just a tendency of convergence. Oh, we didn't like what you did here. You didn't what you did there. We don't like that too much, but yeah, forget that. Okay, we're going to cooperate. And that's what is happening now in the United States in the process of dumping Obama and dumping also this crazy monetary financial swindle system.
Mr. LaRouche, I'd like to ask you a couple, one or two questions on the same subject, which is how we take the national and international Glass-Steagall mobilization to a higher level, such that it can be the thing that brings sovereignty back to the United States. We have two key flanks on this that we've been doing the last few weeks, which is people can look on the website. This week it's been updated, all of the international calls from key parliamentarians in Spain and in Italy and in Germany and so forth, calling on the U.S. Congress to move on Glass-Steagall. And these were delivered last week. This week we're looking at the start of the week we had 18 resolutions introduced in the state legislatures. Three other states where letters are coming from the state legislators to the federal Congress. Now we have this week a bill introduced by 3 Democrats in Illinois, Obama's home state, and Delaware, by roughly 50% of the Senate. And then, of course, as we open this webcast tonight, the news about the U.S. Senate. But in light of where we're headed with this bail-in and the fact that this is accelerating so fast, as you're saying, and people in the Congress, there was a couple of hearings this week, largely seem to be oblivious of the fact that this is going on, with the British Bankers Association coming out on May 14th saying, the executive of it saying, we need the bail-in, the powerful tools, it's been shown. And the EU finance ministers meeting in Brussels on the same day, not debating whether or not the Cyprus template is going to be the model for Europe, but basically debating the details, that this is what's going to happen. And we have, meanwhile, people like Peter Schiff, the CEO of Europe Pacific Capital, this week being interviewed saying, a record-breaking stock market is distorting a frightening reality. The U.S. is being eaten alive by a horrific cancer that will ultimately destroy the economy and impoverish the vast majority of its citizens. And he warns of this collapse of the dollar after this fake bubble blows out. We're already seeing this kind of death in Europe. Reports came out of the hospital system of Portugal and Spain, and there was an investigation by Dr. Jose Manuel Silva, Portuguese Medical Association, this week, showing that there are no doctors assigned to the hospital's emergency ambulance service for 40 to 50% of the time when he investigated Portugal's national system. He says this is now putting us on where you're going to be, where people are in life-threatening situation, they're going to be dying all over the place. And the massive austerity cuts, there was a study done showing what the effect is already here in the U.S. of the sequester. That's now coming out in this big report on austerity. So I wanted to just ask you, and there's a lot more you could go through of the collapse in Europe, the fact that this is happening here, that it's happening here, that it's happening now, and that, you know, as we've detailed the youth unemployment figures increasing by an order of magnitude since 2008, that it's happening now, and yet with the threat of the bail-in looming, what is lacking in our leadership? And so I just want to get to the question, which is, you have what we get from a lot of the state legislators that we're working with. Some of them say, you know, I feel like I'm not really a representative of the people because I am actually just implementing a budget and cutting a budget that I'm being given. I'm not in control at all. I'm not representing the interests of the people, so I'm no longer a representative. And so some of these people want to break out of that. And really, therefore, what is this Glass-Steagall fight really mean? And this week you put out a paper on the Glass-Steagall principle. And so as we're catalyzing this force, or these state legislators, really what does this mean for them? And how can it be the flank that takes back the country?
Well, you've had some experience of late, in the past couple of years and so, of this sort of thing. What you do, you come into a bunch of people and you say, well, to yourself, well, these people are not stupid. Why are they behaving stupidly? And just your remarks just now relate to that. You have people in the Congress, for example, who are not stupid persons, but they're doing stupid things. And they say, what is this that forces me to do these stupid things rather than the things I think should be done? And that's where the problem lies. So what you've got two problems we have now. First of all, since the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the moral level, moral quality, and intelligence of the American population has been in a steady or even accelerated decline. That's what the problem is. We have the human species of the United States, for example, as it existed in, say, 1964, 1966, is no longer. Look at the children out there. Look at the condition of these children who are barely human, or maybe not even human. And this number is increasing as the generations are added to the list. So we're dealing with that kind of now we have to go to make a more profound assessment. And the assessment has two qualities. One, it's the obvious, what the level of intelligence is that's being expressed by our population. What's their orientation? Like the green policy. The green policy is clinical insanity. It's actually cultural suicide, and worse. Because the green policy means that the death rate will increase, the population will shrink, all kinds of horrors will occur with each new generation of children reaching adolescence. You find the general trend has been recently, each generation is worse than the one before. And that's what the problem is. So the solution lies largely in understanding what we have to do to inspire our own people and those of other nations to stop being more and more stupid generation by generation. The kinds of work they could do if they were offered work is poorer with each generation. It's worse all the time. So we've got to reverse the reversal. And that's where we have to locate this problem and its solution. Now, you have to go to permit me to be a little more profound on this. The question is the productivity of the human species. And people don't understand the human species. Even people don't understand the human species. The human species is unlike any other form of animal life. It is intrinsically noetic. Now, you can take a member of a species, an animal species, and you can train them, use them, so forth, all these kinds of things. You can change the way they are treated. You can change the way you select them, these kinds of things. But the animal life of animals don't progress. Biologically, they remain pretty much the same, including intellectually. You can enhance that or make it worse. What's not understood is the fact that the human species is unique. It is not an animal species. That is, the human species evolves upward systemically. For example, scientific discoveries of scientific principle, revolutions. I'm fighting now to get a different idea of what the solar system represents. And therefore our evolution as human beings is what defines us. And when we try to solve the problem of the failures that we experience among our fellow human beings, we don't look to the fact that there is a certain track of development, of noetic development of the human mind, which does not occur in the animal species. And our great problem now, which the environmentalist movement typifies, the environmental movement is a degenerating population. They are worse as a generation from each generation to another. It's backward evolution. And so therefore the problem we have to, if we want to be serious about this, we have to understand that this factor of the development of higher forms of intellectual achievement, profound essential achievement, are the necessary way in which the human species can exist. We see this when we start to look at the question of the occupation of the solar space. You see immediately that when you try to think in terms of ordinary human terms, in terms of what's going on in the solar system, you find that you come up with ideas which are absolutely absurd. You use symbols. Your idea of vision, all these things are different, and they don't work most of the time. But mankind's job is to progress so that mankind becomes transformed into a higher species, as if organically, from generation to generation. And unless we can have that kind of progress, where each generation is actually a higher species in terms of its development, its intellectual and related development, unless we can do that, you're going to have the kind of thing that Europe and Asia have experienced so much for so long, again and again and again. Mankind is like an animal which evolves to a higher species over the course of successive generations, as no animal species can do. And that's what the issue is. If you can't touch that thing, if you can't deal with that problem, with that challenge, sooner or later, mankind fails. As whole cultures have failed in just that way. That's the history of the barbarism in human civilization. People become more stupid by the successive generation, not more effective. And our struggle, if we're going to win, our struggle is to put our finger on that issue. We must introduce true evolutionary creativity. We must change the human species in quality. And it's the only species that can do that, can respond to that. And we have to promote that.
Well, if you will oblige us, we have two more questions for you. And this is a question that actually came in a number of months ago from a few of our supporters. The question came in through the info.larouchepack@gmail.com, asking what your thoughts are on the new Pope, Pope Francis. And given his most recent statement, I would like to go into our archive of questions and raise the question again, because on May 16th, Pope Francis made a very remarkable statement, and in it, he made a point about that you often make about monetarism, in more obviously more theological terms, that money has to serve, not to rule. He said, he began his speech by saying, "We can only praise the positive achievements which contribute to the authentic welfare of mankind." But he goes on that there are certain pathologies that are increasing with their psychological consequences. Fear and desperation grip the hearts of many people, even in the so-called rich countries. Quality of life, enjoyment of life, indecency, violence, poverty, all of those things are becoming more evident. One cause of this situation, he says, in my opinion, is in our relationship with money and our acceptance of its power over ourselves and our society. Consequently, the financial crisis which we are experiencing makes us forget that its ultimate goal is to be found in a profound human crisis. In the denial of the primacy of human beings, we have created new idols. The worship of the golden calf of old has found a new and heartless image in the cult of money, and the dictatorship of an economy which is faceless and lacking any truly humane goal. And I'd like to continue, because I have not seen a leading figure aside from yourself give statements like these. He says that the worldwide financial and economic crisis seems to highlight the distortions of rich and poor, and above all, it lacks human perspective. It reduces man to one of his needs alone, namely consumption. Worse yet, human beings themselves are nowadays considered as consumer goods, which can be used and thrown away. We have started a throwaway culture. And he says, in circumstances like these of today, solidarity, which is a treasure of the poor, is often considered counterproductive, opposed to the logic of finance and the economy. While the income of a minority is increasing exponentially, that of the majority is crumbling. This imbalance results from ideologies which uphold the absolute autonomy of markets and financial speculation, and thus deny the right of control to states, which are themselves charged with providing for the common good. So, with that statement, I'd like to go back to the archived question. What is your view of the new Pope?
Well, it's not the new Pope. That's not the question to ask. It is the new Pope because he's doing something, but it's not him. The point is, it's negative. The issue is negative. It's not positive. It's not comparative values, the usual kind of ethics. The point is, people today are generally becoming more stupid and more corrupt than they were in the previous generations. Now, this is not an unusual thing in the overall history of mankind. The oligarchical system. Look, for example, take Europe. You usually trace Europe from Rome, the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, you got a Venetian army empire came up out of that, the same succession. From that, then you got the next empire, William of Orange's empire. which is this extension of the Venetian system. Now, the British Empire, which controls much of the world, is in the same character. The problem is not that people have failed or institutions have failed per se, just because they were institutions. The problem is that we do have an institution, the oligarchical system. Now what's happened is the oligarchical system is now on a rant. It's on a real rant around the world. It's destroying everything in sight, corrupting everything, ruining everything. We're going to probably invent 6 new sexes in the coming year or something like that. This is the kind of direction we're in. We're in a direction in which the governments that rule over us are impossibly corrupt and degenerate, which the institutions are becoming more and more degenerate, that everything that has authority is becoming more and more inherently corrupt and degenerate. Along comes a pope who realizes that the Holy One was not controlling the job very well. And he comes in and makes a very simple statement of a type of philosophy which has been met in Christianity and otherwise repeatedly. So this is not a mystery. What you are, you're in a morally degenerate culture. And all this Pope is doing is going to precepts of Christianity and some beyond Christianity, which are actually the opposite view. The defense of humanity, the defense of what human beings are. I haven't heard from him any great stroke of genius in this design, but I have seen in that, particularly that one report, which is of some length, the details are all there. The essential figures are all there. He's simply saying, cut it out. Cut it out. And what he informs, the manner in which he speaks, the manner in which he argues, the substance for which he argues, are highly relevant things. And they go to the struggle of mankind against oligarchism. And what you have is you have the worst, the most stinking, most degenerate oligarchical system the world has ever known. And it's centered largely in Europe. It's centered in particular in the personality of the British Queen.
All right, for the final question this evening, I'd like to ask Mr. LaRouche the crux of what people have to get, and I think you just illustrated a lot of it, this much bigger fight internationally. But to come to the theme of the beginning of the webcast, that yesterday was the 80th anniversary of the introduction of the Glass-Steagall bill in the House of Representatives, which ended up passing. The vote was 263 to 19. This was the people. It was not a party system. This was the voice of the people. Really, what is it that people need to get? Is it the fact that they don't understand this history, or is it the fact that they're not taking responsibility for the nation? Because I think that what separates you from most other political figures is that you take responsibility for the nation. You're not looking at the state that you live in. You're not looking at the research that you've been given, looking over it. You take responsibility for that. And when you meet with people in the state legislatures, there are people who want to step forward. And as we said, they want to break from being the prison guard of their own population to, as you're saying, develop the nation. And Glass-Steagall really as being, as it was for Roosevelt, and here we are 80 years later, just the first step. It's regaining sovereignty. And this sovereign control of the banking system is simply the necessity to have then this credit lending system, credit lending institution, and making the economy a financial system which is simply a reflection of future growth, future payment system, and making good on what you're going to do and accounting for it with an economy. Now, how do we get people, this army of patriots that we want to try to create, pulling out of the different levels, the city councils, the state legislatures, Is it the lack of knowledge that that the upward development of an economy is the real history of how the principle of life and man should develop, or a lack of knowledge of our own history, or is it really a lack of just taking responsibility for the nation and the consequences that then puts into someone to say we're going to get it done regardless of ideologies?
But there's not really much mystery in this. There's a desire to avoid certain subject matters, and that's where the problems come into play. We've gone through all this before. The mankind's intention, our proper intention, is to increase our power. We call it changing our culture, a progressive development of what the human mind is capable of doing, which leads to abilities of mankind to do things. For example, now, what's before us? We've got a solar system, which has a couple things like in it, which we are interested in. But we think about this like there's rocks moving around through empty space, that kind of approach, which is nonsense. And mankind is still using that kind of rocks rolling around in empty space. This is something which is a peculiarity of the human sense perceptual apparatus, that we divide phenomena according to what our biological system of sense perception suggests to us. And then we get a little bit smarter and realize that was stupid, and we find a better way. We say these are no longer this is actually explainable in this form, and we can find that we can do it. And so we abandon the witch doctor's advice, and we go to more civilized layers, and that's essentially what happens. Now, the key thing here is, how do we maintain? Let's take the fact of space. We're not going to be on Mars, as I've known a number of times. We're not going to be there in this century. And it's not because we're lazy, because it's not ready for it, because we have not made the kinds of steps that we could actually assure putting human beings on Mars. No one has come up with a means to solve some of the key problems that make the difference between the conditions of life of human-like beings, or something like that, from Earth to Mars. And it probably can be solved. But you're going to have to do a few steps of work to find out step by step how you can do that. So the nature of mankind, however, is unlike the animal, is to make those steps of progress, of going into creating new cultures, new ways of behavior, new ways of understanding things, which enable mankind to be more productive, to be more powerful in terms of the ability to survive and to accomplish missions, all these things. If you have a policy of going backward, like the green policy, the green policy is a policy of mass murder. Now, your greenie pothead may not actually seem to be an enemy, but he's rather stupid, not because he doesn't think, but because he has habits which he enjoys, and these habits prevent him from doing anything useful or sane. And so the problem here is that mankind his education and development must be based on what are the factors, which then there's evidence for how to look at this thing. What are the factors that we must consider in turning the evolution of mankind into a higher form? The point is that mankind is the only species which has the voluntary ability to change its own policy without actually changing its own internal biological apparatus, but simply raising it to a higher level. And what's happened now, as the green policy says, the green policy, if it's allowed to continue, will destroy the human species. First, it will result in mass murder. The green policy is already, genocide on a large scale is already happening in places like the United States itself. And it's because we tolerate it, because we tolerate the green policy. The green policy is the enemy of humanity. So that stupidity and evil sometimes go quite together. Sometimes a stupid man can be more evil because he has no conscience, than the other. So the issue is that. The issue is we have to understand that mankind is a species, the unique species. We will, if we survive, we will change the solar system, or we will change parts of it. We will make changes in the immediate future. We will make more significant changes later. All that is before us. It's our nature. It's what we must do. We must also generally increase the intellectual power of our citizens. This is not something arbitrary. This is something, it's a systematic thing. If you just teach people through discoveries, physical discoveries, discoveries of universal principle, by introducing those factors into the habitat behavior of human beings, the human species improves. It has the effect of evolving into a higher state of existence. Our objective should be that. And I believe that only positive orientations will have that benefit. You've got to say, what is it that is good, which we're missing out on, and which could, our negligence could cause us to destroy ourselves. Like it's a guy, like the reckless driver in the automobile accident. Right? You've got to wake up, buddy, and don't keep doing those same old accidents all the time. And that's the point. We do not have in society today a general leadership, especially we are better off in the United States in many respects than others are. But we no longer have achieved or desired to achieve as a nation, to achieve the process of true creativity, of mankind's ability to evolve to, in effect, a higher species by making fundamental discoveries of principle, bringing those discoveries of principle into play, and mankind thus voluntarily changes mankind to a higher species. And when we abandon that and try to adapt to old habits just to change your style, you're actually destroying humanity.
Well, Lynn, unlike the thoughts of the British royals, that sounds like a very noble ambition. This has been a very exciting week. I think we've got our marching orders laid out. As Leandra pointed out, it was 80 years ago, 1 month from Glass-Steagall's introduction to its passage. Maybe we can outdo that record. So I'd like to thank you for watching. Thank Lynn very much for being with us. Thank Leandra and Michael. And we'll see you next week.